Hi folks, and welcome back to my channel, and this is part number 2 of building your own spray boot. In part number 1 we finished up the framing, and meanwhile I already installed the floating floor, or at least some parts of it, and I'll show you that in a few seconds. But in part number 2 we're going to finish the floor. We'll enforce the floating floor, we'll put boarding up, then we put the boarding on the side walls and on the top on the roof, and then finally we'll insulate it. And then we will look at on how we're going to place the filters, the intake filter and the exhaust filter, because I have to build the filter openings. And we'll have a look at the heating system, which is based on infrared panels. So let's have a look on all the different materials we're going to use in this video. So for the flooring, I'm going to use OSB panels, which are 22 millimeters thick. So that's about twice the size as for the sides. The heating for the spray boot is based on infrared panels, and this is a panel, so it's a very flat surface, as you can tell, and it's 60 centimeters by 120, so it's about 2 feet by 4. It's very thin, and there's no open fire whatsoever. If you look in the back, this is just aluminum in the back, and it's just protective paper on it. But you can see that it's just straight aluminum. So there is no any risk of fire or whatever. So this is a very good way to heat up a paint boot. The only issue with that is that you need to have a surface to heat it up. So infrared panels don't heat up the air, they heat up surfaces. The good thing about an infrared panel to heat up your painting boot is that it does not cause air movement. You know, if you heat it up with hot air and then you need to blow it in, then you get a lot of air flowing around in the cabin, and then you're gonna get dust that flies around anyhow. With this, the air doesn't move at all, and it's very cheap as well to buy. So this is quite good. In total, I have about 3,000 watts for the cabin. That's more than enough, especially because it's not there to heat up the air. It heats up the subjects that are in the cabin, and it's very, very safe as well, and very thin, as you can tell. And this is the insulation material. It's pretty solid, and it's kind of waffled on the outside, and we will glue it at the inside boarding. It's not very thick, it's about 2 centimeters, but it has a good insulation factor. Over here I have some pieces of wood, which I'm going to need to enforce the floor, the grid on the floor, and you'll see that in a few minutes once we start finishing up the floor. And then finally I have the grill. See this grill here? It is nothing really special. It feels like being in jail. Not that I've been in jail before, but anyhow. This is a grill I'm going to use for my filters. So I will have an intake and an exhaust filter, and I'm going to put the grill up in the structure, in the sides of the frame, and then I'm going to put a filter behind it or in front of it, and that way I have a good solid filter system, which is not that expensive, because this grill is nothing more than something you buy in a shop where they buy stuff for the gardens, you know, and that's typically the kind of stuff you grow ivy along, or roses or whatever. So sometimes you can get cheap stuff to do the things you want to build. So let's start going. I had to place in a floating floor because the actual concrete slab that I have is not at all even. I mean, here it's about 10 centimeters higher than over here. So, you know, it's a big difference. So I could have poured a new concrete, of course. Now, if you have a flat floor, you don't need to do what I'm about to do. But I'm going to have a floating floor so I can level this out. I just already placed some supports left to right. And now I'm just going to support it here and there with some pieces of wood, so it becomes very solid. So let me nail them in, and then we'll place the 22 millimeter OSB board on top of that. So that's already a lot stronger. So I leveled the floor, and every foot I have a support which is resting on the concrete. That makes it very solid. It's not going to move at all. See, it's very solid. Those little supports may not be that pretty, but it doesn't really matter because I've made them with leftovers that I had from the frame. So never throw away your little pieces, because they always have a purpose. So let me put the boarding up. It's 22 millimeters OSB panel, which is fairly strong. See? You can even drive a car on this. That is no problem whatsoever. So as you can see, the board doesn't fit exactly on the beam. So I will have to add an additional beam under here. So the board is not just resting on the next board, just on the edge here, because that would not be very good. All right, let me nail this in place. If you have to place floorboarding, then make sure that the boards are placed in an overlap pattern so that the seams of every sequential board are not in the same spot. So you might want to cut a board in two so it's like half, and then you have a nice overlap. Now in your case that might not be necessary because you may have a very smooth and flat concrete slab or a floor. In my case, I had to do flooring. So let me cut this guy off, and I'm not going to go halfway board. I'm going to go about 2/3 because that then works just out in the length. So let us cut it and see what it brings us. It's always good to mark where the support beams are. It's easier for nailing, and because otherwise I might miss the beam. Right. So let's trim the edge. All right, guys, we finished up the floor. So now we're going to put the sides up. And before we put the sides up, we need to decide where we're going to put the filters. An intake filter, which is on my right, and an exhaust filter, which is going to be on my left. So that's one thing. We also will need to decide at some moment in time if we're going to build a spray boot with overpressure. And in fact, that is probably the better model, whereby you have more pressure inside the spray boot than outside, so any dust cannot get in because it will just be pushed out. Or I do it with an under pressure spray boot, which is also possible, but then you have to have very well sealed off areas so no dust can get in except air through the normal intake filter. But I will be having two fans. I'm going to have a fan on the right hand side, which is going to be my intake fan, and I'm going to have a fan on the left, which is my exhaust fan. And I will be able to regulate the fans. So by playing with the fans, I will be able to create either under pressure or overpressure. Not a lot, of course, but at least some. So the intake filter will filter out all the dust particles in the air, and it will be coming in from my right on the top into the spray boot, and then the air in the boot to get mixed with the paint will leave this paint boot on the left. On the left hand side of the boot I'm having a filter, and this is the grid that I will install, and it's about 1.20 meters by 60, and I placed it low down to the ground, and it's in the middle of the left hand side of the spray boot. I use the grid because I'm going to put a filter against the grid at the inside of the spray boot, so when air gets sucked out, the filter is pushed against the grid. Now at the back of the grid I will have a box and a ventilator or a fan in it or a turbine that will suck out the air and will blow it outside. I am not going to use a carbon filter, although I know that it is also in my country legislation that you must have carbon filters and other small dust particle filters in a spray boot. But I'm not a professional spray boot, I'm a hobbyist, so I don't really care about that. I will still filter out the air just to catch the paint, the small paint particles onto the filter, so I do not clog up my fan or my turbine. And of course you have to pay attention to your neighbors, that they are not having any problems with the smell of when you are painting. Now I have no neighbors, my closest neighbor is about 200 meters away from me. So that is not too much of an issue, but if you do have neighbors, be careful because those fumes can be sometimes very annoying unless you paint with water-based paint. All right, so on the other side, I'm going to have my intake filter, which is exactly the same size, but it's mounted high up. And on this side, I have all the way up to the ceiling my intake filter. It's the same dimension as my exhaust filter. I will place the grid in the wall. Again, it's on the right hand side now of the cabin, right in the middle. And I will place a dust filter and particle filter at the outside. So whenever I'm sucking in air or I'm blowing in air, that filter is going to be pressed against this maze or this grill. And that's all what there is to it. So I'm going to get a nice draft from the right to the left. So from high up to low down. Now professional paint cabins, they typically have big filters in the ceiling and they have a downdraft and then the air disappears in the floor. I'm not having this. I'm just going to do it with two large filters, one on the left, one on the right. I think this will just work fine. And if I'm able to regulate the ventilators or the turbines, then I can actually control the air pressure inside the cabin. Now the tricky part is going to be a bit the doors. And I'm not going to build doors because that's way too complicated. I will build panels that I will bolt down onto the side as soon as the part is inside with just a couple of screws and with a seal so I can have no dust coming in. Because if you build doors, it's going to be difficult to make them dust tight, let's say, or airtight. I will, of course, have a little entrance hatch on the left-hand side, a little door where I can get in and out. So, as soon as I have the part inside, I will close up the front, and then I will get in and out the boot through a little door on the side. So before you put a panel up, you always need to mark it, because otherwise you won't find the pillar. You put a nail in, so it won't move anymore. I'm going to mark it at 55. With the mark we have already made below, we can now draw the line and we know exactly where to nail it. This is the exhaust filter. I already put a little frame around it. And it sticks out a bit because the insulation has to come flush. Because I'm going to glue the insulation at the inside. There's a special insulation which is quite strong. It has like a wafer on it. You'll see that once we put that up. Now I'm going to put the grid inside. And then we will hold it in place with some pieces of wood, which I already have pre-cut. Now, you'll notice that I'm also going to put up some little wood bars here, because otherwise I'm afraid it's going to suck so hard that it's going to bend that metal frame. So I just want to make sure that I have sufficient coverage. I gotta get this right, yeah. All right, so I can nail that in. That's the first one that's gonna go in, together with the bottom part. Here we go. All right. I'm going to put the second rail in, or rollers. And now I'll do the other side. Oops. There we go. Well, I think that looks quite good. So let me push that in as well. All right. And the last part is the top part. All right. There we go. All right. And finally, I'm going to kit the side up. This is how it will look like at the end once we have all the insulation plates glued onto the boarding. And this is the outlet filter, and the actual filter will fit in right here. So I can fill up this whole area with this padding, and then the air will be sucked out through that filter to the other side. Oh, this feels just like being in jail or in church, but not that I've been in either one of them. I'm just kidding, guys. But I'm in the back of this filter, and I still have to build the filter box in the back. That's what it's going to happen here, and then I will put the turbine in this filter box, and then I have an exhaust going to the outside. Now, since we built the walls with wood, wood is going to live. It's going to shrink and expand based on the heat and on the temperature and humidity. That's why the corners, you need to fill that up with silicone-based or another elastic seal, so that you don't create a gap once the panels are moving a little bit, because otherwise you're going to get dust inside.